Welcome, Andrea, and welcome, Tom Jr. Welcome to the call today.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, man, I'll tell you what a fantastic company to work with. I was just making a post on Facebook this morning about how we can actually really make the anti-aging process work, and the products that we have with Sisel fit right into that anti-aging category so well.
Absolutely. There's a lot to that, because obviously health is multifaceted in lifestyle and diet. But the exciting part is, with powerful and strategic nutrition, we can really complement our body in staying younger, and in many cases actually reverse the damage that's happened. And right down to the molecular DNA itself, we can actually reverse aging and become younger.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, that's the stuff that we remember from watching Star Trek years ago.
That's right. Beam me up, Scotty.
Right? And you got Dr. McCoy coming around with his little, what was that little box that he had that he would work on people with?
Oh, absolutely. And we see things now. I never thought, here we are on a little cell phone. You know, we're in 3 different states and recording a video. And you're right, that was space age if you go back to the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, it really life has changed a lot, and so, you know, Tom, a lot of people they think, oh, a vitamin's a vitamin. I mean, even your dad, he was saying that on a conference call about 2 weeks ago. He said back in the 70s, maybe even into the 80s, he used to think, oh, vitamin C is just vitamin C. You can just go to the store and buy it, and it's going to be the same thing everywhere. Would you explain to people a little bit, you know, first, before we really get to the meat of the conversation, why is it important to know that that Sisel vitamins, Sisel products, the supplements we have, I mean, they're targeted nutrition, but not only that, they're super powerful when compared to anything else.
So maybe I'll just rewind real quick, just for a couple of minutes, and just tell people a little bit about where I came from. So going back to the 60s and 70s, I grew up on a 75-acre farm, and we grew 90% of what we ate and consumed, and we grew it organically and without pesticides, and boy, the flavor was great, the nutrition was great. But exactly opposite, on the other side of unhealthy, we had a small industrial chemical business. And we were making floor waxes and degreasers and extremely caustic compounds, oven cleaners, and high acid concentration for removing scale in tubs and tiles. And anyway, so I was exposed at both ends of the spectrum, extremely healthy eating and lifestyle. But on the other side, I was making chemicals with my father since I was about 11 or 12 years old.
Wow.
Fast forward into the 80s, all of a sudden science is starting to really come of age and identify many of the compounds that were used, that they were detrimental to our health. At that point, we became aware that many of the things that we were involved in were very unhealthy to us and others. And at that point, we looked at the hair shampoos, the things that we were using every day, and we thought, we can make it better. And we did it just for our family and just for our friends. And that's really where Sisel Safe, the philosophy and the foundation for what we did, started. In the early days, we had lawsuits from the big multi-million-dollar and billion-dollar companies saying, don't say parabens are bad. Don't say propylene glycol is bad. Don't talk about sodium oral sulfate, fluoride, all of these different things, formaldehyde donors and preservatives and pesticides. And all we said is, we elect not to use those in our products. And because people wanted these products, and that's really what brought us into the business of doing this. And so with that background, and that foundation, obviously my interest was into the chemistry and the biological. I went on to the University of Utah and received my degree in human biology and minored in chemistry and actually in animal biology too. My degrees in biology and chemistry. because I really found it fascinating how things work, everything from physics, gravitational poles, how they interact, and the chemistry, and how you combine basic elements to form different moieties that have different effects, and then into how does that work in biology? How do we get these unique keys that fit these unique locks and open them up? So to your question, why is one form better than another? Years ago, I went down to a facility about 4.5 hours from here. They were producing 48% of all the calcium that were in supplements when you go into the big retailers and you buy calcium. And they had a railroad spur, and they were bringing in railroad cars full of oyster and clam shells. Well, that's calcium carbonate. And at that point, they really hadn't heard much about how to precipitate lead out of that, high in lead. But what was the driving factor on the retail market? Cheap. But on the bioavailability scale of calcium carbonate being the least bioavailable, calcium gluconate, citrate, lactate, what's the most bioavailable form? Calcium for milk. I mean, it makes common sense. It comes from a mammal to build skeletal. Mother Nature, over hundreds of thousands of years, has developed, the most bioavailable form. So we use calcium in our calcium K2 product because it's the most bioavailable form. So you can take, let's say you took a milligram of ours, you would need 10 or 20 milligrams of calcium carbonate, but it's price. And so the retailers, they want calcium at the cheapest price on the shelf. Well, being part of Sisel, we want calcium that is bioavailable and also has the cofactors that are there to be part of that, so that our bodies will absorb that. The same's true with about every different vitamin and mineral that you have. You can chelate them, you can get them from different sources, but also the cofactors. We know with calcium, you must have vitamin K, you must have vitamin D, you must have the right balance with magnesium, because even if the form's bioavailable, if it doesn't have the other support mechanisms, your body will still not absorb it. So every formulation that we go into, we look at the biological form and function and what is necessitated to make that happen. Probably a great example that most people would recognize would be our fucoidan product. Well, fucoidan, if you look at PubMed, when we started, there were just a handful of studies, but we saw the historical data. We saw, publications like National Geographic say more people in Japan live to be 100 because of the seaweed that they consume. Well, if we look at brown seaweed, we know there are 1,500 to 2,000 different species worldwide, and they don't all work the same. They're different species because chemically they are made different. So then at that point, there's really about 40 some major varieties, but there's 1,500 to 2,000 different types. At Sisel, I want the very best, and I want to know why it's the best, because of the different components that unique species generates. And that can be said the same with industrial hemp with CBD. It can be the same with resveratrol in form. Liquids are better than solid dose by a long shot. And every single product that we have must meet first, before we even get into GMP and organic and all the different certifications that we have for making a product in a GMP facility. First, it's a much more stringent process to get to the Sisel safe and find out, does it really have biological value?
That's right. Well, and I'll tell you what, as a consumer, as a purchaser of the products, I really, once you know that, these things that you just talked about. It's important to us. And as a doctor, it's really important to me, because when I go talk to my patients, I can say, this is what this product will do, and I can guarantee it based on that. So that's really good. You know, you talked about calcium. I was at a conference, probably 20 years ago, and they were talking about how the FDA grandfathered a lot of these calcium products into the market, even though the lead content was considered to be higher than what the EPA allowed. They grandfathered them in because all these nutrition companies were already using it, and the FDA didn't want to have to close all these companies down. So that's really, really important. When we're talking about detecting things like lead and heavy metals and that, you know, how do you guys go about testing for that?
Well, one thing we place extremely high value on vendors. And so we're not out there on the spot market, you know, looking at corn prices, $3.50 a bushel here, $3.75 a bushel there. Once I find a vendor that can give me what I want and can maintain the quality and the components, I'll tell you what, they're better than family in many aspects. But so if we take something like, well, we'll just talk in generalities. If we find a vendor that can submit a sample, and that we have, especially if we have a known of what we want, at that point we will go through many different processes, everything from the organoleptic, the smell, the taste, the color, the fragrance, and at that point we'll go through and then we break it down for the active components that we're looking for. And depending on what you're looking for, you know, you might use a thin layer chromatography, a TLC. You might use an FTIR if you're looking at organic components, and that can take everything from solubilizing it in solvents, or you're putting in an ICP and you're taking plasma with high energy and you're trying to break that apart, and then you're measuring the wavelength that's emitted from that to identify that. Because the beauty of science is the fact that it is 5, 10, 20 years ahead of when you go to the store and buy a product. So what we're doing is we're looking at these researchers from around the world, and over the last 40 years, we've developed a great network with labs, with scientists, with cultivators, with manufacturers. I've seen many come and go. I've seen new ones start up that do great. I've seen those that are consistent. So I value vendor relationships. So once we find what we're looking for, then you determine the lab techniques that need it. Now we have a great lab here, and we have an ICP, and we can do TLC, and we have HPLCs and columns, so we can measure the vitamin content each time, and we can break down heavy metals to make sure our values are extremely low, and we look for pesticides. But here's the thing with Sisel Safe that's very difficult, that most people who are in manufacturing don't worry about. When you buy something, let's say like a shampoo surfactant, something that basic, and they'll say, okay, here you go. Here's your sodium sarcosinate, your ammonium lauryl sulfate, your cocamide, MEA, DEA, TA, whatever it is. Well, they have to preserve those products. At that point, they put preservatives into the system that never show up on the label. And they're usually parabens or many things that we won't use. They can be formaldehyde donors, quaternarium 15. They can be a multitude of things. And they, by law, do not have to disclose that to us. So to qualify a vendor, we qualify them not just on quality and what we are looking for in an ingredient, but we have to qualify them on Sisel Safe. And that's been very difficult. Back 20 years ago, when we went paraben free, and the industry thought we were crazy, when I requested ingredients without that, I had to pay a premium to have that done, because now they had to make batches only for me. But now you see the industry, we were definitely the first to go out there and say these things are potentially harmful to your health. But now you go into most stores and they give you, you know, all the good, none of the bad, and paraben free and all this. We are the pioneer, we are the innovator, and we stay ahead of that curve. Now companies that are making ingredients try and accommodate that niche market, but we're out there way ahead of them in that. So our lab is set up not only for making sure that we have stringent GMPs and that we meet label claim and government levels in highs and lows, and also in biologicals and yeast, mold, and bacteria, but that we can quantify and qualify those vendors and ingredients to be Sisel safe.
You bet.
Tom?
Well, you know, and one of the things that I was taught was to say that, you know, it's not only important what's in the product, but or it's not only important to look at the label and see what's in the product based on the label claim, but it's also important to know what's not in the product, and that's what you just kind of explained.
Absolutely, because I guarantee you, if you were to break down many of them, we'll go back to shampoos that are out there that say, yes, and we're preservative free. And I've done this with a major vendor years ago who was getting after us for saying that certain ingredients were bad. And I broke theirs down and sent them an analysis back and said, look at all the hidden preservatives you have in your system that you're not claiming on your label. And yeah, you're exactly right. It's what's not in the product that can be equally as important, because many of these manufacturers hide things in there.
You bet. Well, Andrea, I know you had a question there for Tom.
Yeah, I was going to mention that maybe our audience doesn't know what a GMP is, and that Tom could explain that.
An ICP, or is that what you said?
You said GMP, good manufacturing.
What is it?
Oh, GMP.
Yeah.
GMP. Yeah, so good manufacturing practice. In fact, I just ran over today because I knew we were going to be talking about this, and took some snapshots over in the facility. And so here is a certificate that we have that we hang in the front lobby of the manufacturing facility. And this is issued by the Department of Agriculture and Food here in the state of Utah, and it's a good manufacturing practices certificate. And so what they do, they come in every few months and they make sure that you're testing your water, that you have employee training on good hygiene. They make sure that you are compliant with all good manufacturing processes. In fact, I went through and there's all different kinds of certificates that we have, from industrial hemp approvals to business licenses to national organic program certifications, Utah Manufacturers Association. There's all different types of organizations out there, but there's not one for Sisel Safe except for Sisel. And I've got to tell you, that's the hardest one for our vendors to meet. And we've done all different types of certifications, and that's a good thing to have, because it gets your employees, your batching people, your lab to, you know, it gives them a standard that they must adhere to. But then to take it one step further, then we go to the Sisel Safe and we say, and it must meet this criteria to be part of our products.
That's awesome. You know, last year I toured your facility, and your dad has developed an awesome water system there. Maybe today you'd like to explain just quickly how awesome that is.
You bet. In fact, it's funny you say that, because I look at my whiteboard here, and I was just going through that the other day with our engineers. And so I'm glad you bring that up, because I've got the whole drawn out here. We're looking at making a few modifications. So basically what we do, we have great water here in Springville, where we're located, from the Rocky Mountains, and we have some great springs on the mountain, and they bring the water down into the valley, but they chlorinate it. And they have to, by government standards, to make sure they don't get pathogens like E. coli and many other horrible things that you wouldn't want in your water. Well, at that point, when the water comes to the facility, we strip it down literally just to water. And so when it comes into the facility, it goes through everything from a particle filter, which is pretty basic, down to a smaller filter that will actually strain out any bacterias. It goes through a carbon filtration bed to take all the organic materials and all the chlorine out of it. It goes through which many people are familiar with, a reverse osmosis process to bring it out to only water. But once we have that, it's on a continual loop that goes through a high impact tube of UV light to make sure nothing is growing in that. And then also we have ozone that we inject that lasts for about 20 to 40 minutes roughly. And then we analyze it for that. And just to make sure that water just stays pure all the time. And you're right. I mean, if you had a facility like that for many small towns, they would really enjoy it. It's a water plant within the plant. And, but it starts with good water.
Yeah, and it's great. And you guys can like infuse that in different ways for different products, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, you can change that. You can dose it back with specific minerals that actually affect flavor. But then we add the Sisel ingredients to that. Absolutely. We can infuse it. We have a big tube. I can infuse oxygen back into it. If I want to have a high oxygen content, we have a turbulator and yeah, you can do many things with it, but to get it down to just clean water, that's a real starting point.
That's awesome.
You know, Tom, when you're talking about the certifications, the GMP rating and things like that, you know, if I remember right, GMP rating, part of it is related to the product as well. Like you have to guarantee that that product's going to have that same potency for a certain length of time, right?
Not so much on GMP, but with FDA, absolutely. Because you have to, when you make a label claim and you have a list of vitamins and minerals, you need to make sure that those levels are maintained through the life of the product or the expiration. So yeah, we have shelf life chambers to where we accelerate heating and we freeze products to check everything from, does it break down viscosity, color, flavor, but most importantly, do the vitamins break down? Does the protein start to dissipate? Will bacteria start to grow in it? And we inoculate them with different types of strains of bacteria, Pseudomonas and E. coli, and to make sure that they will withstand any type of exposure during the life. But you're right, the FDA requires that. The GMP from the state, yes, they encourage that. They don't monitor that so much. That's more on the FDA label. That they make sure that we do that. Correct.
You bet. And so when you're talking about, you know, I mean, there's like what, 4,000 vitamin manufacturers out there, is what I've heard. And of that 4,000, is there only like a handful or two handfuls of companies that are actually, that go through the process like you guys do with all of the certifications to guarantee that your product is what it is?
Yeah, there are. I'll go back to CBD. So it took me 3 years to be the first licensed manufacturer of CBD. But I knew of multiple storage units and homes where people were just bottling these products in non-GMP facilities and marketing them. And many of them, if you get on Fox News and Dr. Oz, you see that 80% of them don't even have CBD in them. So people who are doing that in an office or in a small warehouse, they're not worried about GMPs. They're worried about making money. In fact, the reason why 80% of these don't even have CBD in them, because they can buy hemp seed extract, which has no CBD, for about $30 a gallon. and they're just topping those off. They're not worried about label claim. They're not worried about shelf life, stability. They're just worried about, making money at that point. And so you do have that. I've seen encapsulators that people just have in warehouses, and it's not even their industry to be in food. And I've had them come to me over years and say, hey, let us encapsulate a product for you. And I mean, we have our own encapsulators here, but I have people who find pieces of equipment and they want to get into manufacturing, and they're not worried about any of the particulars that guarantee a quality product, and they're not worried about the government regulation either. And to guarantee quality, you have to have a combination of both of those.
You bet. I remember I was taking a tour of another facility out in California. I don't know, it was probably 20 years ago. And this company was making the most popular multivitamin on the market. I won't mention any names because I don't want to get in any trouble. But they were saying that they took this and they actually put some good raw ingredients into it, but then by the time they heated the pill and they squeezed everything together, they super compressed it, they caused so much heat generation that it oxidized and it destroyed a lot of the vitamin content. And then they took that vitamin and they coated it with shellac. And I was told that only 3% of people have the ability to actually digest the shellac so you can absorb what's in the vitamin.
Oh, if you get on the internet, look at some of the screens where they actually screen sewage, and look at all the capsules and tablets that have actually been consumed by people and gone through a municipality sewer system and are sitting at the sewer plant undissolved, and they just completely go through. And so you're exactly right. And so where we have our own lab, everything is tested in the preliminary stages of just the vendor itself. But once we actually get into a production, it's tested at the door, it's tested when it's batched, it's tested after it's been filled and put in the final container. And then there's a shelf life study that is concurrent on that product through the life of it could be a year, it could be 2 years, to do exactly what you said: verify the mineral, verify the protein, verify the vitamin, any of the label claim there, because that's exactly it. When we fill Fucoidan, we fill Eternity, we fill Spectromax, we have only so many minutes. Once that has gone through the process, we have a huge cooling tunnel that it has to come out the other end at roughly 75 to 80 degrees. And because you're exactly right, if the temperatures are too high, everything falls off, because as we know, heat breaks down organic compounds. And so you have to get it down. And when you first ramp up a product, you have to do your shelf life studies, because you might start with 140% of some vitamin just to make sure as it goes through the process that 2 years down the road, what you say is on the label is what is in the product. So when these small companies start, they're not concerned about that. They're concerned about getting it in the bottle and getting it out there. Now, going back to disintegration rates, in the lab, we actually mimic a hydrochloric acid solution, which is the same as that found in your stomach. And we put these compounds into that when they're in capsules and solid dose forms to make sure that they disintegrate within a few minutes time, to make sure that they're exposed to your digestive system so that they can be consumed. Because the situation that you just described occurs every day out there.
That's right. Well, Andrea, I'll hand it back over to you. Any final questions for Tom?
No, I think he's covered everything really well, and people should be satisfied with what Sisel has done to make the world a safer place.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. It's been my pleasure to be on here, and we'll have to do maybe some segments on a few other things too. And we're living the dream here and living the Sisel mission, and we appreciate so much what each and every one of you are doing out there to spread the mission of safe, healthy, viable products that improve our lifestyles every day.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate it. Make sure and tell your dad happy birthday from all of us.
I'll do it. Have a great
All right.
day.
Give him the spanking, the birthday spanking too, you know.
I'll say this is from Doc and Chewy.
That's right. All right. Well, thanks, Andrea.
Bye.
Thanks, Tom. And you guys have a great weekend.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.